Hello and welcome to the Green Profit Academy Pros Podcast. This show digs into the challenges in growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit. I'm Christeen.
And I'm Steve Bousquet. We are the green industry experts in profit, growth, and leadership. Hello and Happy New Year to everyone listening to the Green Profit Academy Pros Podcast. I'm super excited today. We have a special guest, Mike Michalowicz. He just launched his All-In book, his new book about leadership on January 2nd. Welcome to today's show, Mike.
Steve, Christeen, it's good to see you both. Thanks for having me.
That's such a great way to start out a new year. You've got a new book.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever launched a book. This time of year, my publisher was funny. They said, when we were scheduling, they said, you can launch it in January, but we strongly suggest you don't. And I said, why not? They said, because no one launches a book in January. So I said, that sounds like the ideal time. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And it seems like it's gotten really great response so far because I've been following it, checking out the activity even on social media and people's engagement, and even leading up to it. There was just so much interest in this book, which I totally understand why, because leadership has always been, kind of like that trouble spot in building great teams for small businesses. It's like we have a culture whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
It's the whole, how do we create it? What does it mean to be a great leader? So this is, and I've said it before many times, my absolute favorite book of all of your books.
Thank you.
I love the content. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and maybe my favorite too. What was great was we were able to circulate about 200 to 300 books prior to the publication. So even though the book just came out, people were able to read it as of months ago. And the feedback has been interesting and great. To your point is when it comes to leadership, I've been doing a lot of public speaking and saying the job of an entrepreneur is not to do the job, it's to create jobs. The job of the leader is not to be doing the work, it's to be leading the organization and give it a bearing point, a direction to head on, where everyone's being served. And I believe more now than ever that we need great leaders. We need people that are building a structure that helps people in their own individual journeys. Jobs aren't jobs anymore. There's more to it. It's a communal experience. It's a life experience. We need it more than just for work. And so leaders have to step up their game to set that environment.
So I've been reading the book, and what I find amazing is that, people need to step up. And this book is not about how we as owners, entrepreneurs need to take on more responsibility, need to do more things, and need to fill our plate with more. It's how do we build a team of leaders, a team of people in our company that lead every day, so we don't, whether we're there or not, so we don't have to constantly be, watching and micromanaging and everything. Mike, I'm interested, what was the moment or inspiration where you said, I have to write this book?
There's two situations that came about. It was one became the moment, but the first was simply a stream of inquiries about the next generation of the workforce, the millennials, who are now the main workforce, and how do I manage this community? And they are human just as any other human, and but still they're coming in with a context that many leaders weren't prepared for. And so I was getting this feedback. So I was like, let me research and find out. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, everything in the workforce changed. There was an expectation now for remote work. Before there was a desire, there was an expectation now for flexibility. Before there was a desire, all this stuff that the workforce was asking for now was mandated, and it happened overnight. So when COVID hit, I said, this becomes my top priority. I have to get this written. I had spent collectively about 5 years researching and testing, deploying stuff. But when COVID hit, it became hyperspeed in rolling this out.
Yeah, COVID changed everything for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I know I've been remote before remote was even a thing. It's been my business model for over 20 years, and so we were so used to it. So our team, it didn't impact us the way that it impacted others, but we also didn't have that perspective of how different it is and how much businesses would struggle going remote. And a lot of it kind of went around resources, availability, and even trust. Trust was a huge subject that kept coming up in coaching conversations is, well, yeah, I could let them work remotely, but what are they really doing? Or are they doing their job? And my question was, what makes you question that? Like, tell me more about that. And so just the experience on the other end was interesting because we had always been this way. So then to interact with people who are trying to adjust and get their head wrapped around it, it just piqued so much curiosity for us.
I think a lot of this trust component is around measurement. And before it was simply observation, looking over your shoulder, are they doing the job? Micromanagement was the defined way of leadership for most people who don't trust their team. Micromanagement is where I'm going to control every activity. The second you became remote, I can't watch over everything. I can't see what we're doing minute by minute. So now it's like, well, maybe she's doing personal things, taking care of, personal effects and needs and not doing the work. I can't micromanage it. It forced leaders to, well, either the weaker leaders threw in the towel and said, I just can't be done this way. Everyone has to come back to the workforce. I think the great leaders stepped up and said, oh, measuring people's or watching activity step by step is not the way to lead. It's outcome-based leadership where we agree, hey, what's the objectives that you and I want us to achieve in your role? What are you going to do to move your role in the organization forward? And we agree to. Then let's measure the achievement of that. Not how you get there, but the fact you get there. And sometimes, and in many cases, people have a better path on their own to getting an outcome than following the mandated path. So I think the traditional approach of SOP saying step 1 is this, step 2 is this, and step 3 is that. It's a very manufacturing oriented process. COVID forced us to look at a new way, saying what's the outcome and give more flexibility to our team. And when people are given more control, more flexibility, generally they'll take more responsibility because now this is something that is under my domain of control. I have a greater sense of possession. I'll think more highly of what I'm doing. I'll have a greater affinity toward what I'm doing. So the outcome can actually be much better, but the leader's got to move from this observing and controlling every step to collaborating on the outcomes we want to achieve. And that's a hard transition for a lot of leaders.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to have that transition if that was your mindset. Up until 2018, the mindset at our company was work or be fired. And then in 2018, right, it was old school, right? That's how we grew up. You work, you show up, you work, or you're fired. In 2018, I switched the entire focus of the company to safe and supported. And that, coming back after developing that, I was on a retreat with both of you. And that was my breakthrough moment of that safe and supported work culture, bringing that back to a landscape company and rolling that out. And then, not having it look kumbaya, but realizing that was the future. That was how I was going to lead my millennials. And my management team is made up of all millennials. So how was I going to lead those millennials? And that safe and supported is what we stepped into, but not in a kumbaya way. It was very, strategic, supportive, having them step up into, as Christeen likes to say, your true authentic self. And me getting out of their way, thanks to clockwork and being able to go on these 4-week vacations, getting out of their way, letting them step into and owning these roles.
In the book, I talk about this approach, which I mean to a little rhyme. When we force people to comply, they will seek to defy. And this is human nature. When we have these very strict rules, do it or you get fired, do it or don't. And if you don't do it, you get fired. Those rules, what happens is people will often comply with what they're required to do, but will seek ways to get back at the authority or the organization. The example I use in the book, and everyone has experienced this, is with a rental car. You got to fill it up with gas. You got to make sure the clean interior is there when you return it. You got to have no scratches. We're given very strict rules. And they set punitive measures. Like they check your license 50 times before you even leave the place so they know who you are. You better buy that insurance. So what do many people do? Well, we abuse the car outside those parameters. I I floor it when I leave the traffic light, or I'll grind those brakes as I'm coming into it, because it's not my car. And who's going to show me what I need to do or what is expected of me? I have the right to control what I want to do. So that's the compliance defiance thing. In the employment space, when we tell people you are required to do X, Y, and Z, and your failure to do that will be punished, people will actually seek to defy it. They won't have an affinity toward the organization at best. The other scenario, though, is when you help nourish, people will flourish. And what we want to do is give people direction to fulfill their desires, their needs, their visions for themselves through the job environment. So this isn't, as you said, Steve, it's not kumbaya. It's not like, hey, whatever you do, everything's cool, flowers everywhere. No, what we're saying is, what would be a success for you in the year or years ahead as you're employed here? What do you want to achieve for yourself within this role here, but also for your greater life? And then what can we do in this company to help you achieve those roles? And now it's more than a carrot. You're putting out someone's real vision and purpose in front of them, and they can start marching it forward. Leaders help people nourish that and achieve those personal goals. And I consider walking kind of locked in arms together, that while you work with my company, Steve, people work with yours, Christeen, people with your company, that we're supporting their individual visions. They are naturally going to reciprocate and support the corporate vision, which is ours, the leader's vision. So it's a very strong approach that we use to march forward.
Yeah, and I love that because it's in how you present it in the book, and it just really spoke to me because I've struggled with this topic of how do I show up as the right leader for my team? Who is that right leader?
Yeah.
And the right answer was the right leader is me. Like, who am I going to show up as for them? And, how can I be my best self? And it's not mirroring myself as, the leader I think I should be. It's being who I am and finding the best parts of me. And that is what really spoke to me in the book, because you never say, be this person or be that person, or you need to be more this way. It's really giving some structure and some guidelines, like, some guide rails on this is what great leaders do. It's not how great, like how they are or what they're being or who they're trying to be. It's the actions. And those actions can be associated with any personality, because we all have different cultures in our company, and it's really reflected by who we are as a leader. So it's like, hey, here's some great tools that you can use to be the best leader you are without becoming somebody else and just becoming a better version of who you are at your core.
The greatest people express the greatness within them. And that's what we need to do. I run a survey of audiences when I'm speaking, and I'll ask the room, and I'm totally setting this up like it's so obvious what I'm doing. I'll say, hey, who in this room is an A player? It's a common phrase for someone that's a rock star, puts all their effort in. I do have a definition of what an A player is. An A player is someone whose identity is shared with their job role. They see themselves as part of the organization, and that's substantial to them. There's no greater driver in humanity than complying with their identity. But so I'll ask people in the room, who's an A player here? And these are entrepreneurs, business leaders. All the hands go up, except a couple, crocodile hands. But everyone's hands go up. So it's 95% of the room consistently. I'll then ask that exact same audience right after that. I'll say, what percentage of the population are A players? And that's when we're like, 5%, 2%. The person that's really gracious is like 10%. And then I'll pause and say, listen, we just did a survey here a second ago, and everyone in this room is an A player, yet only 10% or less of the population is. So either something's askew here, or there is a statistical anomaly happening right in this room and all the A players gathered. Then I continue and say, my argument is it's true. Everyone in here is an A player, and every human being on this planet is an A player. The thing is, I think we need to define as A potential. Everyone has the potential to express their greatness if we discover what is great within them. It does not mean that every company has a role for every single person. I have a small itty bitty business here. We have about 20 people collective. I don't have a role for everybody. Most people won't be able to express their greatness within my organization. And as a great leader, my role is to identify, hey, you aren't a fit here, but you do have a greatness you can express elsewhere, and maybe even help that. Conversely, I may think I have, underperformers in my organization, and I'm just not letting them express their greatness, and you can elevate people up. I have seen C's become A's in organizations when the leader has changed their environment. There's a whole book dedicated to this. There's a book by David Marquette called Turn the Ship Around. And it's a fascinating study in how we label people A, B's, and C's. They changed one person on a submarine. This is a Navy ship that had, I think it was 250 seamen on the ship. And they were rated the worst performing ship in the entire naval force. They changed one person, the leader, the captain, and they became the top performing ship within a year. Now, how's that possible? If everyone's a C player, that's impossible. The reality is the captain of the ship helped people express their greatness within, and it became a great team, and it led the Navy. So we as leaders have to do the same.
And that's let people go in chapter 12, talks about letting people go, find their greatness outside of our organization. And one of the things reading this book was, a lot of books after you get to chapter 5, you got the point. Yeah. Well, honestly, every chapter added to the previous one. So, this is the kind of book you're going to want to read the entire book because it just keeps building and improving on the previous chapters.
Thanks. One thing that really excited me about writing All In was deploying this model I call FASO, F-A-S-O. It rhymes with lasso, but it stands for fit of an organization, the ability within people. We kind of talked about expressing greatness, the safety and environment. We have to have a safe environment. It's not just physical safety. And many businesses don't even think physical safety matters anymore. It does. Imagine you don't feel safe in your environment physically. You can't perform. I was like, well, that's not an issue I have in my own company. We ran an anonymous survey. We had a physical safety issue. I asked my team and they said, we have an alley that goes outside the office here that you leave the office to go to the parking lot and it's pitch black. They said, I'm afraid to go down the alley, which means, the sun sets in the wintertime around 5:30. People around 2:00 start thinking about the end of the day. They're worrying about their physical safety. You can't perform. We installed string lights. And now it illuminates the whole alley and it feels much safer. And that was something we had to implement. But there was another component of safety with financial security. It's part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A core element is financial stability. If we don't feel we have that, we are compromising the quality of our life significantly. A business that implements open book management is a great way to give people a sense of financial security. I'm not saying you necessarily are paying people more or less. That is a part of it. But a bigger part of it is simply to know where the company is headed. It's financial security because our hands are locked together in progressing. So financial open books brings about financial security, which is very interesting. But the last part of the book, just to your point, the book continues to kind of arc, is this concept of ownership. How do you make employees act like owners? And I devoted probably 2 chapters worth of having employees or colleagues act like owners because they feel like they're owners. And what was so interesting is it did not require, and actually it was sometimes hampered by a legal form of ownership, like an ESOP or something like that. What we need to deploy, most importantly, is what's called psychological ownership, that feeling and the emotion of control and authority within my role, which makes me feel like an owner.
Core Growth Strategies provides business growth management solutions through cloud accounting, bookkeeping, and strategic business consulting programs. Our team works with small businesses in lawn care and landscape and trade industries throughout the U.S. We increase our clients' business acumen by creating business performance transparency through financials and strategic advisement based on industry best practices and benchmarks. Our experienced team provides support, guidance, and coaching, thereby allowing our clients to connect with viable data and discover their own solutions. Core Growth Strategies programs and services are designed to get your business from where it is now to where you have always dreamed it to be. Visit us today at coregrowthstrategies.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Don't miss our exclusive limited time podcast special. Just mention promo code GPA Pro to any member of our team during your complimentary consultation, or enter the promo code on our site when you sign up for one of our online programs. That's promo code GPA Pro.
Yeah, in chapter 6, fostering psychological ownership. I was honored to be featured in that chapter, and
I loved it.
story on that page 112 to 114 about just ownership. In that book, we're sharing the story about gloves, right? So we had a big snow season. We went through like 12 dozen gloves because they were disposable, and it was about $1,000 worth of gloves. It wasn't, crazy money, and we were making money plowing, but it was ridiculous to have to constantly order gloves. And simply, I just wrote their names, their first names on their gloves. And, we went through about, 20% of the gloves that we went through the previous year. Once we went and wrote their names on the gloves, and the wheelbarrows, my guys were breaking wheelbarrow handles, and it was just like constantly fixing them. And nobody would fess up to how they were breaking. So I wrote their names on the wheelbarrow, and everybody got their 2 wheelbarrows each. And then all of a sudden, no more broken handles. And, the thing is, and I share this in the book, I visited 40 landscape businesses over the past 23 years. And when I show up and there's trash or dirt or leaves in front of the front door entrance, and that just signals to me what else isn't being taken care of, what else is being paid attention to. So with my team, I'm like, what else are they breaking? What else are they not paying attention to if they're breaking the handles and throwing all these gloves away?
One of my favorite stories that you shared, Steve, was actually the pitchfork. It was mind-blowing. And so what you were demonstrating through putting people's names on their gloves, on the wheelbarrow handles, is a sense of personalization and ownership. This belongs to me. It's within my domain. I can determine what happens to it. And so when people have that control and authority and personal association, we start using the word mine. And that's the big thing we're looking for. When people say that's mine or my wheelbarrow, it's different than that's the company's. So when it's the company's, we disassociate with it. Who cares? That's the company's responsibility. But the second I feel it's mine, I will care for it in a much greater, better way. Well, the pitchfork, you did the same thing. And I remember you used pitchforks, and I can't remember the cost. I think it was $200 or $300 for a pitchfork. They're not cheap, but repairing one isn't cheap either. But you had one employee who was had such an affinity toward their pitchfork because their name's on it. That was their pitchfork. They brought in for repair after repair to care for this thing. And that just demonstrates how our mind works. The beautiful thing is this can work with physical items, pitchforks and wheelbarrows. It can work with intangible things, the accounting system. You just got to give people the ability to personalize it to some degree. So instead of having the QuickBooks system, call it Jane's accounting system or something like that. Just that sense of personalization. The other part is give people control over how they use it. So I know, Steve, you have cubbies at your place. So everyone has their own cubbies. They can store their equipment, their gloves there, perhaps, stuff like that. In the accounting intangible area, can people personalize it in some way or have some authority over it where they can help maybe co-create the GL account system and how it's labeled and stuff? Because when they have that influence over it, they have a greater affinity toward it. The only risk we're running here, though, is if you give people too much control and authority, where it builds a fiefdom, they're the only one in the know, the only one that can control it, then they can start blocking and tackling, keeping other people out, which can become harmful. Should they leave, or should say reverse golden handcuff you and say, I want more money, I'm the only one who can do this, you're in trouble. So one technique to elevate from mine is to get to ours. And if you can get multiple people associating with it, the collective mentality becomes ours. That's called collective psychological ownership. So on the wheelbarrow, can we have it more than just one person's? Can we have 2 or 3, the blue team's wheelbarrow? And I know you did this with toolboxes. And that's a powerful strategy when you get the our mentality.
Yeah, we started color coding all the tools so they went in particular trucks. So that was that team's colors, tools. Yeah, that definitely works. So then we knew A, if we were missing tools, and B, whose tools they were. And then there was way less borrowing. There was a lot more ownership of that. And another thing that we did here at where we work, we have about 30 team members. So each person that works here has their own parking spot with their name on it. So it has their first name on it. So everybody knows where they're supposed to park. But because it's their parking spot, there's never trash in it. It's never dirty. It's never messy. And a little thing like that, is a big deal. And it's probably the only time they've ever had their own named, reserved parking spot.
So we, one of the stories I included in here was a smokehouse in Texas. They make barbecue. And one of these employees they had was a C player. His name was Joel. I had the opportunity to interview this guy. And when he came on board, his performance was abhorrent. He was only hired because the employer of the smokehouse, his buddy said, "Hey, this guy is unemployable effectively. Would you do me a favor?" Which is typically not someone you want to hire when you're doing a favor. This guy came on board, and the owner, his name is Steve King. Steve deployed psychological ownership. And I don't even know if he did it knowingly, so to speak, like, oh, this is a behavioral technique, but just instinctually. And what he did, and this is a key part too, as you deploy psychological ownership, is to start slow and let it grow. Instead of saying, "Hey, you own the front end of the restaurant, manage the place, go, go, go." He started off with literally the straw box. On the bar was this box of straws. And what the owner, Steve, noticed is when people would pull a straw out, it would basically explode because other straws would kind of hook in, and there were straws spilled out all over the place. So he went to Joel and said, "Hey, I'd like you to own the straw box." And that is a key component too, to use the word ownership. And Joel said, "What does that mean?" He says, "Well, this is your space, your category. Here's the outcome I want us to achieve. Do you agree to it? We want this neat and organized." And Joel said yes. And Steve said, "Why do you think it's important to me?" He said, "Well, I think one thing that's important is that it presents well." Exactly. That's a big deal to me, and so forth. And that way we don't have waste of straws. So they agreed to the outcomes. And then Steve said to Joel, your job is to handle it. There was no SOPs. There was no when we're halfway through, restock it or anything like that. Just manage it. And because Joel had that authority over it, and had that ability to do it the way he wanted to do it, sure enough, the straw box was great for the next few hours and the next day or two. And then Steve started to expand the responsibility. The straw box became also the bar mat, became ultimately the bar. It did take about a year, became the entire front end of the restaurant he was managing. What's fascinating is Steve considers Joel his number one employee of all time. He is so loyal and dedicated. That's the other interesting part of ownership. Once we start having ownership over something, we embrace the rest of the organization. We see ourselves in a higher light. We set higher expectations for ourselves. Our identity shifts to a higher level, and therefore our performance improves. And that's why I'm not surprised when someone has a name on a parking spot. I own this. Well, this is my territory. I'm going to maintain this at a higher level. I'm going to clean it up. I also suspect there's a residual benefit that people are being even more careful with the other property within their domain and the rest of the organization. It's a natural tendency because our identity elevates.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that too, because in our company, it's we don't have wheelbarrows and we don't have tools and stuff in the way that landscape and construction companies have. But at Core, we have everybody's remote, and they get when they start, they get a laptop. It's their laptop, And I was worried about, oh my gosh, what if I supply them these laptops? What are going to happen to them? They're expensive. Never have had an issue. Everybody has cared for it, taken really good care of it. And then we also, we have an onboarding process when we hire somebody. And we've been building out this onboarding process for years. And it's very intentional. And it's all about communication, transparency, and support. And that's the main drive of it. And we've been told in the past that, we, do baptism by fire, to where they say, we're like, here, hold this, and we push them in the deep end. And, we just throw whatever we have at them. We do that. But what we have learned is the people who get through that while we, use our system of communication and support, they last with us. They are the team members that stay with us, and they are so invested, and they look at the clients as well. that we give them as their clients, and they're caring for their accounting process, their books, supporting their team, supporting that business as it was their own. And one of the things that kept coming up as we talked to our clients over the years of, what is it that, makes us different from others? What is it that, why do you keep working with us? What bonds this tie? And the response was, we feel like you and your team, not me, Christine, we feel that Core is a partner in our business with us. And all we are doing is caring for their numbers and caring for the people who care for their numbers. So we support their internal bookkeepers, we're that counterpart for them. But that whole culture we created with the ownership, with trusting them, giving them things, that transparency, it unknowingly created that sense of ownership of this is ours, not just mine. And these are, my tools I need to support our journey.
I love that story of throwing into the deep end. Steve, and we were talking prior to going live here about the sauna experience. There is a scientific term, and it slips my mind now. It starts with an H, like hormosis or something. But basically, our body strengthens in response to resistance to a degree. And Steve was talking about setting his sauna to 220 degrees. If you've never done that before, you shouldn't start there. But it shows that your body can build to it. There is a certain temperature where it becomes dangerous. But it also becomes dangerous if it's too low. Our body needs that stressful state because then it goes into defense and building and it strengthens it. It's just like lifting weights or any other exercise is you have to kind of get to that pain state, not injury, but pain state in order to start building. Well, it's true with our companies. What I found great leaders do is they give their team enough rope, not to hang themselves, but enough rope to experience the pain. But if they are going to hang themselves, come in and protect them from that. They don't set up an environment where everything's block and tackle for them. They'll never grow and they won't build an affinity. And they don't put them out in a situation where they're at real major risk. It's putting them in that 220 degree equivalent. And it sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's the one thing I've noticed with the people that we hire is they all grow. They're not, and I know Steve has this in his company too. They're not the same people that started working with us, a year ago, 6 months ago, 2-3 years ago or more. They have grown into, a better version of themselves. And it's not us pushing them, but it's the collaboration and the diversity that's surrounding them, because we do have some amazing people that work for us that are highly talented, skilled, intelligent. And when we start commingling, it's like there's this influence that starts happening and this inspiration of growth. And well, I could do that too. Or,
Yes.
I've been kind of putting that off. I think it's time to actually take that vacation and unplug. And so, there's some motivation to where we're motivating and inspiring each other to be better. We're not forcing each other. There's that inspiration that's in play.
Yeah, we become the people we surround ourselves with. When the opening of All In, I write about a story. It's kind of this duplicity in a path people take. It's this security guard named Alexander Vasiliev in Russia at the Boris Yeltsin Museum, and he's supposedly protecting a piece of art called Three Figures. It's faceless figures. It's the Mona Lisa, if you will, in Russia. At the same time, there was a guy in the U.S., I think his name was Ben York, working for the Baltimore Museum. What happened in Russia, they said, don't even look at the art. Your job is to stand there and just observe everyone's walking by and don't let anyone damage the art. By the end of the day, within 24 hours, the art was damaged by none other than Alexander Vasiliev. He drew eyes on there thinking the art could be improved. That's the extreme, I think, reference to if you are forced to comply, you'll seek to defy. One thing that was interesting, kind of this backstory as I was researching it out, was Alexander Vasiliev was a veteran from a Russian war, I can't remember which one, who experienced severe injury and couldn't stand for extended periods. He was in severe pain if he stood for more than about a half hour straight. He was now forced to stand for 8 to 12 hours in a soldier-like position. he was in excruciating pain. Maybe that was in part an expression of it. Back to the US, though, Ben York at the Baltimore Museum, the curators of the museum went up to him and said, what do you see here that we don't see effectively? Now, he also was guarding art for 8 hours, standing there. And he said, I know more about this art than many of the curators do. But what happens is people come to me and say, where's the bathroom? He goes, I'm basically a glorified bathroom attendant pointing to the bathroom. I can express and talk more about this art. The curators of the museum said, well, tell us more. It ultimately became Ben York and 17 other guards who came together, and they did an exhibit called Guarding the Art. And it was the guards who made an exhibit of their favorite pieces. They learned to be curators themselves. They laid out the museums for the flow. They managed the insurance and stuff. They were, of course, coached through a lot of these components because it was new to them. But they made their number one exhibit of all time, meaning it was the highest performing exhibit, the most attendance, the most in demand, the most media exposure, the most in all these different categories. What's interesting is now that happened about 2 years ago. 2 years later, all those guards still work at the Baltimore Museum, all 17. Well, actually, 2 of them don't. 2 of them have gone on to be professional curators. They've elevated to new opportunities. The Alexander Vasiliev made it for 24 hours. And, well, Russia has never been found again. But you can just see how leadership has an influence over the people's path. Do we nourish people, or do we force compliance? Choose option 1, nourish.
And Mike, what's really impressive about this book is how much it covers, like why people aren't engaged, why they're not like showing up as their true authentic self, and why they're not having ownership. You also have a chapter about like recruiting potential and adopting the 5-star fit. Yeah.
The recruiting potential is my favorite. I'll share a little story that I referenced in the book. But imagine we start a band, the 3 of us. And Christeen's our lead singer. You're our bassist. Maybe I'm the drummer. We need a great guitarist. And what we could do is say, assuming Eddie Van Halen was still alive, we could say, hey, well, Eddie Van Halen is one of the best 80s, 90s guitarists. Maybe he could join our band and be our lead guitarist. Wouldn't that be amazing? Now, if we call Eddie Van Halen, if he was still alive, it would be we'd be a joke. He'd say, I already got my band. Don't worry about me. Forget about it. So how do you get that rock, in this case, literal rock star employee? And what you do is you do it by seeking potential. Most people seek experience. We say, well, who already has done this? Because if they've done in the past, they can likely do in the future. That's what most resumes are. We look at the resume and say, well, if they've done this well in the past, they're probably good in the future. Usually a bad indicator, but sometimes it can be a good indicator. The greatest form of, I guess, ability that a person has is their potential. What could they do in the right circumstances? So how you find them is you set the right circumstances and invite folks in. So going back to Eddie Van Halen, say we approached him when he was like 10 or 11 years old. That's when he was starting to get into guitar. We approached all the 10 or 11 years old and we put on a workshop, a rock guitar workshop, and say, hey, come to the workshop and learn how to play some chords and jam out on your guitar. What we'll see is, and it always reveals itself this way, is the people who show up have curiosity. The first level of potential is, I just have interest. Like, I'm curious about skydiving. I think I might do it. I would show up to a workshop about that, maybe go with an instructor. But the next level is desire. Desire is where someone says, I got to do this again. Or I have a lot of questions. I want to improve at this. I'm really interested in a deeper level. Our job when we do these workshops is to vet out the people who are just curious from the people with desire. And the highest level is thirst. Thirst is where people literally can't stop. So with that skydiving, there's certain people, maybe many, that would say, I'll consider it. There's a lot who maybe do it once and they're like, I'm never doing this again. But then there's people that have desire and say, oh, I could do this pretty regularly. Let's make this an annual event. And then there's some people say, I can't stop this. This is who I am. I got to do this the rest of my life. Our job is to put on those workshops. These are where we train people on the skills that we're actually looking to hire for. Seek out the people with desire and thirst. Earlier on, I said, everyone has a potential. I believe everyone on this planet is an A player in the right role. But if we're looking for the people that have already proven it through resumes, that's where we get stuck in that 5 or 10% number. The other 90% of those A potential folks are waiting to be discovered, and they may not even know they have it. So by putting on these workshops and these training events where people can start experiencing, expressing it, we'll be able to vet out people who desire and thirst. Those are people we want to try to hire.
Yeah, and I would agree to that. We in the last year we hired somebody to be an admin support person in our company, and it's been many years since we've had admin support that did all my admin stuff and various admin stuff around the company that we needed. And that person was very skilled and talented. COVID hit, we lost them, and they moved on to somewhere else, and we hadn't really had anybody since. And it's been just a hard journey to find that person. And we did all the like hire first for what's their resume say, and do they have experience and references and all this stuff. Finally, we hired somebody who had no experience. They just had potential. And this person has ran circles around everybody that we had hired. And, that just didn't work out. And they're taking on so much ownership. They're looking at some of the simple tasks and going, well, I'd be interested in offloading these someday, and focusing more on this. So it's like even in the last year, they've elevated. And I think it's really speaks to what you're saying is we looked at their potential. We identified what their strengths and skills were, and then we just let them own that area. And they have even said to me, I've never worked at a company that just tells me to go figure it out and to look at it and go, what's the best option? And it's my decision of what the best option is, and they've done a really good job, I think, because of that ownership and the potential that was there, and then the support of the environment. So I totally agree that it's not about their resume. It's what are their strengths, and are we providing that role for their strengths just to really bloom?
Yeah, it can be confusing for some people too when you were brought up on the compliance requirements. Here's your roles and jobs, and stick with the standard procedure and don't riff at all. So when you grow up working in environments like that, and you come into a company that says, well, how should we do this? It's actually a little bit confusing. So a lot of times we have to actually deprogram, if that's the right word, or untrain people. And there's an advantage to bringing in people without experience, because you don't have to de-experience them from the past. And you can, grow them or support them in growing in the way that's best support of what they're looking to achieve in their lives, but also in their company's roles. There's a lot less effort in many cases for those folks. There's also an appreciation I see. I've had it too, where I've given opportunities where I couldn't get elsewhere because I didn't have the experience. And then someone brings it to me and says, hey, you can try to prove yourself here. And you can become who you want to become. You're going to have to put the effort in. I have an appreciation for those organizations and an affinity toward them because they gave me a shot. And it sounds like that's what you did for your colleague.
So thank you very much, Mike, for being our guest today. And I know you have a very busy day ahead of you, and I appreciate you joining us today. Congratulations on
there
your
it is. Yeah, I got mine here.
All in. And we appreciate you again. Go buy the book. It's really, just reading through it, it's kind of a how-to, like build culture, hire, train, keep people, retain, let them step into their greatness. So go buy the book. It's All In by Mike Michalowicz. And thanks again, Mike.
Christine, Steve, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening to the Green Profit Academy Pros Podcast,
the show that digs into the challenges of growing a lawn care and landscape business while maximizing your profit.